organizations and other forest protection organizations. In addition to working with Global Justice Ecology Project, I'm also working with Global Forest Coalition, which has developed a lot of critique around REDD, and they just released a brand new report, which I unfortunately forgot to bring with me, but it's at their booth in the exhibition hall, that looked at forests around the world and the impacts of these REDD programs, that the initial programs that have already been carried out. And so if you're interested in some feedback about what's actually been happening on the ground, I encourage you to go to the Global Forest Coalition booth and pick up that report. The big concerns that we have with REDD, of course, relate to the human rights issues, but they also relate to the forest protection issues, and they also relate to the climate change issue. Because the way that REDD is defined, in our opinion, is going to actually exacerbate climate change. It's going to increase carbon emissions, not decrease carbon emissions. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which I'll get into in a minute. But one of the big red flags that came up for us was in October we went to the World Forestry Congress in Buenos Aires, and the major theme there was forests and climate change, and one of the big things that was being talked about was REDD. And they were very excited, the timber industry, about REDD. They felt like they were going to be making a lot more money because of REDD. And even the woman with the UN's REDD Secretariat, Tina Vähänen, her quote at that was that REDD would be very beneficial for forestry. Not for forests, but for forestry. And she stated at the end of her talk that the forestry sector cannot afford to lose this opportunity. And the reason why, according to her presentation, was that REDD would be worth $45 billion to the forest industry. So how you can have something that's going to benefit the people who make their money off of cutting down forests and have it as part of something called reducing emissions from deforestation does not make a whole lot of sense to me. And the other message coming out of the World Forestry Congress was that there is a desperate need to increase the demand for wood by making wood into liquid fuels, into electricity, into heat, into plastics, into all of these synthetics, and that by increasing the demand for wood, we can also help reduce emissions from deforestation, which is completely bizarre in my estimation. So we have this kind of bizarre greenwash going on around REDD and the things that it will do. Last year in Poznan, people are probably familiar with what happened there with the REDD text, where a block of countries got together and removed all references to indigenous rights from the text. They removed all references to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That has caused huge backlash among the indigenous populations where these projects are targeted. But beyond that, the text makes no mention of biodiversity. So we have a text supposed to protect forests that, because it uses a terrible definition of forests, forests being basically just trees, doesn't matter if they're native trees, doesn't matter if there's any other thing in that plantation, that can be called a forest. And because of that, that means that the REDD program can actually exacerbate the loss of native forests and increase the number of plantations in the world, which then has an impact on the climate, since studies have shown that plantations store about 1/4 of the carbon of a forest. So when you destroy a forest and you put in a plantation where it used to be, you've significantly decreased the carbon storage potential of that land. There is a lot of problems with the verification of the carbon stores, how much carbon is actually being stored in these areas. There's no real attempt to address the underlying causes of deforestation, like overconsumption, like the expansion of industrial agriculture. Genetically engineered soy fields in Brazil are causing massive deforestation in the Amazon. These things are not being addressed by REDD, which guarantees leakage. It guarantees that when you protect a forest in one area, it's going to cause logging somewhere else. You have to address the problem of demand. Instead, there's more, as I mentioned before, there's more emphasis on increasing demand, which means that REDD inevitably will fail. You can even include genetically engineered trees in REDD because of previous UN decisions, and that's a whole other problem that I won't get into right now. But basically, I'll just conclude by pointing out that in 1950, when global warming first began to be noticed and scientists first began to be paying attention to it, we had 500 million hectares more of intact native forest on this planet than we do today. The emissions at that time were here. The level of forest on the planet was here. We're now like this. The emissions are much higher. The forest is much less. To expect this little bit of forest that's left to take care of all of these emissions is absolutely unscientific. There's no evidence that we can do that these little bit of forests are going to deal with this amount of emissions. We have to decrease emissions at the source. We have to protect the remaining forests that are on the planet, and we have to decrease the consumption of wood products, and we have to give land rights back to indigenous and forest-based populations, as those are the best ways to protect forests.
Thank you very much.